भयप्रदकरं कौपीनमात्रोज्ज्वलम् स्वात्मानन्दरसानुभूतिविवशम् सर्वानवद्याङ्गकम् श्रीमन्तं श्रीरमणेश्वरं गुरुवरं योगासनाध्यासितं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् हृदयकुहरमध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रं यहमहमिति साक्षादात्मरूपेण भाति हृदि विषमनसा स्वं चिन्वतामच्युताव पवनचलनरोधा आत्मनिष्ठो भवत्वम्। Namo Ramana. We will commence this week's Friday evening Atma Vichara by listening to Bhagavan's Upadeshan. We have been reading from the book Ramana Answers, Self-Enquiry 1900 to 1950. This is a collection of all the questions and answers given by Bhagavan on the questions related to Atma Vichara by our founder and president Sri A.R. Natarajan ji. We will first read the question and answer for this week and contemplate on it by Master's grace, following which we will have a 20 minutes Atma Vichara session. After the Atma Vichara session, our President Sarada would be talking about the Atma Vichara itself as it's been discussed in Ramana Gita by Ganapati Muni with Bhagavan. For this week's question, we have been given as a continuation of what was the last week's answer given by Bhagavan. So I will read out the last week's question answer and then read out the question for this week. So we will be looking at the question answers between 1936 to 1950. The last week, the devotee asked, what are the steps to realization? To which Bhagavan had said, realization is already there. The state free from thoughts is the only real state. Is there anyone who is not realizing the self? Does anyone deny his own existence? Speaking of realization, it implies two selves, the one to realize, the other to be realized. What is not already realized is sought to be realized. Once we admit our existence, how is that we do not know ourselves? So Bhagavan sort of put a question. Once we admit our existence, how is that we do not know ourselves? To which the devotee then in a form of an answer says, because of the thought, the mind. It is because of the thought, the mind, that we feel that we do not know ourselves. Because a thought comes, I don't know the self, I have not realized the self. That makes it appear so real. Therefore, the devotee saying to the Bhagavan's question, once we admit our existence, how is that we do not know ourselves? The devotee is saying, because of the thought, the mind. To which Bhagavan is saying, quite so. It is the mind that stands between and veils our happiness. How do we know that we exist? If you say because of the world around us, then how do you know that you existed in deep sleep? Is the question, a counter question put by Bhagavan for Vichara. So, Bhagavan is affirming that it is because of the thought alone that we feel that we have not realized the self. But in reality, realization always exists. It is just that the reality given to the thought makes us feel that way, that the truth has not been realized. In the Vedanta, usually the way this is looked at is because self is Swarupa and everything else is the Rupa. So the example they usually give is the pot is the Rupa, a vessel is the Rupa, but the sand is the Swarupa or the clay is the Swarupa of all of them. If you break the Rupa, what it ends up becoming is only the natural thing which is its Swarupa, that is the clay. It is likewise, the Swarupa of whole of this creation is self. So no matter what we see as body, or as tree, as insects, animals, or stone, sky, whatever we are seeing in the world, all the Rupa is made out of one common ingredient, that is the Swarupa, which is the self. So, because moment we start seeing the Rupa, moment we start seeing the utility of a pot or a vessel, then we are so engrossed in seeing it that way that we don't recognize that it is clay alone. We forget that. It is the similar way Bhagavan is saying, because of the thought which stands between, we forget our natural state which is of happiness. It is the thoughts which constantly bring up some imaginary forms, sometimes mentally, and some real forms, the way we are seeing outside. But it is all nothing but self alone. But because we have given so much reality to the Rupa and not seeing the Swarupa, the stuff out of which this whole thing is made, we don't experience happiness. We may see a thought like, I have not realized the self, appear in front of us as a Rupa, and it is only because of the self we recognize it. But instead of seeing the self, we may give lot of reality to the thought, like we give reality to the vessel and its utility. Like that, we give lot of reality to the thought and its utility, and therefore the thought is saying, you have not realized the self. Therefore, we feel that is very, very real, and therefore, though our natural state is happiness, free of thought, free of any division, because of this thought and giving reality to us, we feel unhappy. I have not realized the self. We become unhappy. This is what Bhagavan is saying. He says, because of the thought, the mind, I am not realizing the self. When the devotee says, he says, quite so. It is the mind that stands between and veils our happiness. It covers our happiness. It has not removed the happiness. It has just covered it. Like the sun can never be removed. A cloud can cover it. For a momentarily, the sun and its effect is not felt. Doesn't mean the sun has been removed by the cloud. Doesn't mean that the thought has removed the self. The thought has only veiled it, covered it for a moment. That is what Bhagavan is saying here. How do we know that we exist? Therefore, Bhagavan is asking, even when that thought has veiled you, it is only by inquiry that we can recognize that it is only a superficial veiling, not a real veiling. Therefore, only when we counter to whom is this thought that I have not realized the self, it is for me. Who am I? Without my existence, how can this thought really be real? How can it claim? Does the thought have an existence without my attention to it? Like that, when we inquire, that's why Bhagavan is putting the question, how do we know that we exist? If you say, suppose if the answer comes, it is because of the world around us, then we can put a counter question. Then how do you know that you existed in deep sleep when the world was not there? So by putting inquiry, by putting vichara, and with bhakti, with full devotion to realizing that truth, that to that self that is there, with true bhakti to it, and with vichara, so that none of the thoughts mislead us into something else, so that we don't pay attention to the cloud, but always pay attention to the self. By using the vichara and with complete devotion that we want to be with the self, if we do the practice of Atma Vichara, the twin swords of it, the bhakti gives us that one-pointedness, that we want nothing else but that one self alone. And the vichara cuts all the distractions that rise in the form of a thought and continues to superficially cover the truth, whereas in reality, the truth is not there. So the vichara here and now removes all the superficial coverage on the self, and the bhakti makes us established, atmanishto bhavatvam, that it makes us establish in that truth. We surrender all these things to that one truth and abide in that. That this is the path that has been given to us. So we need to very, very clearly understand, even when the pot is appearing, the clay is not lost. It has just taken another form, but it is nothing but clay alone. Likewise, no matter how many thoughts, subtle things may appear, so many gross things may appear for us, but it is all nothing but the self. If we remove away all those distinctions that are being created, or what we call the meaning making, which Venkateshji used to say, what is the utility of the vessel? Instead of going behind the utility, if we don't go behind the utility of a thought, but to see to whom it is appearing, here and now, we always get back to our Swarupa. It may be with effort, doesn't matter, but by repeatedly abiding in that Swarupa, which has never changed and which never changes, we become quite acquainted with that. Bhagavan says the mind will gain enough strength to be with that truth. With the immense grace of Bhagavan, with which alone we have come to this most direct path, where he asks us to be ever abiding in our Swarupa and not get carried away by the Rupa, by the way of acting, of questioning every Rupa that appears to us, every object that appears to us, be it a thought. It always first appears as a thought. So by inquiring to whom is this thought and recognizing it is for me, and that me is also a thought, and therefore inquiring who am I, what do I really refer to as I, and searching the source of the I, and thereby getting back to that stuff with which everything is known or comprehended or made of, that is the self. By repeatedly abiding back in the truth, Bhagavan assures that the mind will gain the strength to be there and be that Atmanishta, which is the Swarupa. And therefore, that happiness, that existence that we are, is continuously experienced without a break, no matter what is the external circumstances. And that is the happiness that we are all continuously looking for. And Atma Vichara is the way to see, to move away from the seeming unhappiness to the happiness which alone is. The immense grace of Bhagavan for the next 20 minutes, let us do Atma Vichara.
Namo Ramana. Prostrations to Ramana, shining is the self in all beings. By the immense grace of the self manifest as Ramana, we are meditating on self-inquiry, and by that very grace had been able to practice self-inquiry for a session of 20 minutes. And in this part of the satsang, we are meditating on Bhagavan's dialogues with various disciples and the answers which he has given to their questions as recorded by Ganapati Muni in the Ramana Gita, which has 18 chapters. We are now meditating on the verses in the 3rd chapter. The title of that chapter is Mukhya Kartavya Nirupanam, the definition of the highest duty, defining what is the highest duty. And we saw Bhagavan has said that the highest duty is abiding in the self. And we also meditated on the thought that why is it considered to be the highest? It is because that is the only thing that we want, that everyone wants. Everyone wants to be happy all the time. And this happiness is the very nature of the self. It is not to be found in any object whatsoever. Happiness is not the nature of any object or any objective experience. Anything outside of the self is not the source of happiness. So, if we want to be happy all the time, if we truly want to be happy all the time, then the answer lies only in abiding in the self. First of all, becoming aware or knowing what the self is. Now, in today's question answer, in the first section, we find Bhagavan saying that there are no two selves for one to know another. Here, Bhagavan in Ramana Gita, he is saying, Swasya Swarupam Vijneyam. To know the self is the highest duty. But again, in Ulladanarpadu, Bhagavan says, Navedmyaham mam utavedmyaham mam iti pravado manujasya hasyaha drigdrishya vedat kimayam dvidatma swatmaikatayam hidiyam navedaha. To say, I know myself, I don't know myself, such statements, Bhagavan says, are actually absurd or ridiculous or funny. Manujasya hasyaha. Na vedmyaham mam, I don't know myself. Uta vedmyaham mam, I know myself. Iti pravado manujasya hasyaha. It is a matter of ridicule. It's a matter for laughter. Why? Drishya bhedat kim ayam dvidatma. Are there two selves? The question which Bhagavan asked in the first answer which he gave in the, as I said, which we meditated upon, which Dileep meditated upon in the first part of today's sharing. Are there two selves? To say, I can know it or I cannot know it? Is it an object? That's the question which Bhagavan has put. And he says, there is only the self which ever remains as a self. But here, Bhagavan is telling us, know the self. Why? Because the illusion of separate identity arising in the mind veils the self, as it were. It hides the experience of the self. So we seem to be unaware of our true nature. Since we seem to be unaware of our true nature, or we can say the awareness of the self, which all of us have. We all know we exist. We are all aware of existence, and that means existence and consciousness are there. But it is mixed up with something else, with the sense of being a body. So, since there is a mixture of right knowledge and wrong knowledge, since there is a mixture of light and darkness, there is a necessity to explore, to inquire and explore and discover the truth. Discover. It is covered, and so we need to discover it, the truth about our own true nature. And Bhagavan says this is the real fruit of all actions, because all actions are performed only to experience happiness, and that happiness is the nature of the self alone. So when one abides in the self, when one knows the self, then one would have attained all the goals. The goals or the fruits of all actions would have been attained, which is why it is said in Upadesha Saram by Bhagavan, Krityamasti kim swasthitim yataha. If one is abiding in the true state, in one's own true nature, what remains to be done? Because all action is for the purpose of experiencing happiness. If one is ever abiding in the bliss of one's true nature, what would then remain to be done? Nothing further would remain to be done. Therefore, here in Ramana Gita, Bhagavan says, Sarvesham phalanam utakarmanam. It is the fruit of all actions. What? Knowing oneself, abiding as the truth. And if one is convinced about this, then automatically the mind will turn inward. But it may not be very clear to us how to turn inward or how to discover one's true nature. That's why Devarata goes on to ask, Swasya swarupam vigneyam sadhanam kim samasata. What is the practice? What is the sadhana one has to adopt in order to know oneself? Siddhyet kena prayatnena pratyak drishtirmahiyasi. By what effort will one be able to see the self? Or will the self be revealed? By what effort? What is the effort we have to put in? And Bhagavan says, Vishayebhyah paravritya vritti sarvah prayatnataha vimarshe kevalam tishte dachale nirupadhike. Vishayebhyah paravritya vritti sarvah. So, from all the thoughts, from all objects, one should turn the mind inward, away from object, and fix it in the non-objective experience of the self. Vimarshe kevalam tishte dachale nirupadhike, in which there are no adjuncts. In that experience, one should fix the mind by turning the mind away from all objects. And Bhagavan says, Swasya swarupam vigne, Swasya swarupa vijnane sadhanam tat samasataha. Siddhyete yatnena pratyak drishtirmahiyasi. Tena eva yatnena. By this effort alone will the truth be revealed. What effort? Turning the mind away from objects. Vishayebhyah paravritya sarvavrittihi. Vishayebhya paravritya kevale vimarshe kevale tishte dachale nirupadhike. In that pure, adjunctless, absolute stillness, one should fix the mind. What does it mean to turn attention away from objects? What are objects? Objects, okay, we know that when we open our eyes or when we are experiencing in the waking state, various objective experiences come to us through the sense organs, our eyes, nose, ears, mouth, yes, and our skin. Through all these, we see, we hear, we smell, we taste, and we touch. These are all objective experiences, which Bhagavan, again in Ulladinarpada, he describes it in the Sanskrit. Muni says, Shabdadirupam bhuvanam samastam. This whole world consists of these 5 sense experiences. So these are all external to us. So when Bhagavan says, turn the mind away from objects, it is very important, or it is very obvious to know that we are not going to be fixing our attention on any of the sense experiences, because sense experiences are evidently the experiences of objects. I see something which is outside of me. I hear something which is outside of me. I touch something which is outside of me. I smell something which is outside of me. I taste something which is outside of me. These are all evidently objective experiences. So when Bhagavan is saying Vishayebhya paravritya, can we be focusing attention on any of the sense experiences? Obviously not. So if we are not focusing our attention on any sense experience, what could we be focusing attention on? These are obviously gross experiences, but there are also subtle experiences like the emotions. There is fear, there is sorrow, there is anger, there is disgust. Okay, are these related to some sense perception or not? Can I feel fear of anything other than of an object? If there is no object outside of me, can I feel fear? Can I feel fear when there is nothing outside of me? That's why, as Dileep said, if we look at the experience of deep sleep, can we feel fear? We cannot feel fear because there is nothing outside of us, nothing is known outside of us to feel fear of, to be afraid of. There is nothing outside. So if there is nothing outside me, if I am not paying attention to anything outside of me, can I feel fear? I cannot feel fear. Then can I feel disgust? I cannot feel disgust. What can I feel disgusted about if there is nothing outside of me? What can I be angry with, or with whom can I be angry with? I am angry with someone other than myself. Sometimes we say I am angry with myself. So at that time, what happens? Why would I be angry with myself? It means that I see myself as subject and object. I see one part of me which I do not like. I see something about myself which I do not like. I do not like the fact that I am behaving in a particular way. I am angry with myself. So I am angry with some aspect of my behavior. I am disgusted with some aspect of my own behavior. How is it possible? Unless I perceive that part of me as an object. I see that behavior and I say, I don't like the fact that I do this. So I am seeing my behavior as an object apart from me, and therefore I don't like it. I may feel sad about it, I may be angry with it, but at that time, that part of me has become an object which I myself am recognizing. I recognize it as something which exists and something which can be changed. I don't want to behave in this manner. That means it's an object. It's that part of me which is there, which can be put away, which can be done away with, which can be discarded. And then what would happen to me? Would I still remain or not? I would remain. Sometimes I am angry about my anger itself. I don't want to be angry. So my anger then becomes an objective part of me. And when I get rid of my anger, do I continue to exist? I continue to exist. So my anger is as much an object for me. Every experience, everything that is known through thought is an object. Thought itself is an object. I know that I am thinking of something, thinking about something. We cannot think about nothing. We think about something, some object. So every thought is a Vishaya, is an object. The presence of a thought means there is an objective experience. So when Bhagavan says, Vishayebhyav paravritya, turn the mind away from objects. What are we supposed to do? We are supposed to turn our mind away from the thoughts. And how? Bhagavan has given us the simple way to turn away from thoughts by questioning for whom is the thought. When we question for whom is the thought, the attention is turned away from the objective part of the experience. I am no longer thinking about my anger, my fear, or what I see, whether it's a gross experience or a subtle objective experience like a feeling which is manifesting in my thoughts. When I question, for whom is this thought? For whom is this experience? At that point, the attention has been turned away from the objective part in the thought back to the subject I. For whom is this experience? For me. For me. There itself I am not worrying about the experience. The experience may be anything whatsoever. However, if I pay attention to the experience and I say that I should be angry or should not be angry, I should be sad or should not be sad, I should be afraid or should not be afraid, I should see or should not see, whether I affirm or negate any experience, my attention will continue to be only on the object. Whatever even the highest experience, even if I say I should be thinking about Bhagavan alone, my attention will be only on the object. It may be a supreme object, and that's why Bhagavan says, even if I tell myself I must get self-knowledge, I will be engaging in an objective activity, in an object-based experience. And if I tell myself I must get self-knowledge, on the other hand, if I ask myself, for whom is this thought that I must get self-knowledge? Who wants to get self-knowledge? For whom is this thought? I. Even to a person who said to Bhagavan, I want to see God, Bhagavan said, who wants to see God? Who is it in you who wants to see God? Who is that I? So for every experience, Bhagavan says, turn away from the object, back to the source, which is achala, which is nirupadhike, nirupadhika. It has no upadhis, it has no adjuncts, it has nothing added on to it. Everything that is added on has to be an object. If I add something to something, if I add water to milk, the water is not milk. If something is added on to me, that is not I. So it is nirupadhike, without adding anything whatsoever to the self, by itself. Let us turn the attention back, says Bhagavan. Keep turning the attention back in this way. This siddhyetena yatnena. That is practice. Yatna, prayatna, practice. By this practice, the truth will be revealed, says Bhagavan. And by his grace, this practice happens. It keeps on happening. It happens intermittently to begin with. And then by that very grace, it will become santatam, shalipara, santosham. It will become continuous. It will become joyous. It will become untiring. And then Bhagavan says we can enjoy our own true nature fully. By that very grace, the fulfillment also will come. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana. Namo Ramana, thank you.
Aparasachit sukhavarirashi yasyormimatram bhuvanam samastam guhahitam tam ramanam gabhiram Chintavihiram hृदि चिन्तयामि